As usual, good morning, good afternoon, or good evening, anyone watching live now or later, the video or the podcast format. Welcome to a very special episode for me because I am very nervous and very excited to be here by long-time friends of the channel and people that have been very, very kind to me. So I would like to start introducing the very first person that ever commented on any of my videos, and someone with whom I've embarked on these very long reads, The Wheel of Time, and now Sanita series, and that is none other than Mr. Ian Porter. Ian, how are you?
How's it going, everybody? It was a lot of fun coming on that journey with the Wheel of Time with you. So I'm so happy that you decided to invite me again on this adventure.
I don't know. It was you that convinced me to do this series. So, and we're here because of you. My next guest is someone who I can always trust to save the day and make any conversation better. Slipstream author extraordinaire, coolest name in fantasy writing, Susana Imaginario. Susana, how are you?
Hello, I'm good, thank you. Thanks again so much for having me here. It's a pleasure and an honor to talk to you guys. I adore your work, Christpher Ruocchio. It's just one of the best things I've read in the last few years, and I read a lot. So
Thank you.
I'm here delighted.
Fantastic. Then I want to introduce someone that has been strangely, and I don't know why, even though I have asked him, super kind to me, has facilitated the biggest interviews I've done on the channel, and it's the Evil Kid himself, editor at Buying Books, Mr. David John Butler. David, how are you?
I'm very excited to be here, Jose. Thanks for having me.
No. It's my absolute pleasure. And obviously, last but not in the least, the Knight Commander, Emperor of the Solan Empire himself, Mr. Christpher Ruocchio. Christopher, how are you?
I'm doing well. Thanks for having me back.
No. Thank you, all of you. Seriously, I'm actually a little bit nervous today. I've got some kind of questions here, but I'm hoping that Ian and Susana will step in at different points and get the conversation going. There's already 4 people lurking there in the chat and watching. There was someone waiting like an hour ago for this to start. So anyone, say hi, say hello, pop your questions in the chat. Before we get started, just in case there's any more people, coming in a little bit late, what are you guys reading at the moment, Ian?
I am currently reading Brissinger. I'm book 3 of the Inheritance cycle. I'm reading that. And then I'm also picking up reading and absolutely loving. It's called Rise of the Ranger by Philip C. Quantrell, the first in the Echo Saga. So I'm focusing on those 2 right now. And then I'm going to be starting a reread of Red Rising here before Thanksgiving because can't wait to get back into that series.
You've always been one of those people with a reading speed that cannot be matched. Susana, what are you reading now?
Just a couple of light reads, taking a break from things too serious. So I'm re-listening to the Dresden Files, the audiobook. So I'm almost like 2 hours left on book 7, and I am reading Mort, the Discworld series by Terry Pratchett.
So you'll be joining the discussion.
Because of you.
Yeah, thank you. Mr. Butler, are you reading anything for pleasure, or is all work for you?
There's no difference. The line disappeared. It's all pleasure. I'm not reading fiction for myself right now. The most recent 2 pieces of fiction I've read are in manuscript form. I just read the next Liaden novel, which I'm trying to remember the title of it, honestly. Diviner's Bow, which is science fiction, and then I read Gregory Frost's 3rd book in his Rhymer series, which sort of has his Thomas the Rhymer character, who's become the deathless enemy of the Elf Queen, fighting her in Elizabethan England. For non-professional things, I'm rereading Robert Eisenman's sort of bomb-throwing study of James, the brother of Jesus. I think it might be called James, the brother of Jesus. I'm not sure about that, but yeah, that's what I've got going on.
Interesting. And what does a writer read?
Not much at the moment. Dave, of course, knows that I'm functionally illiterate. Dave sent me like 3 books to read, and I just like haven't, between the baby and work, had time to read anything for fun. And he keeps making fun of me for it. I did, however, I did just finish a fiction novel called Pilgrims by Michael Leonard. He asked me for a blurb, and it was great. Just came out actually, I think earlier this week or a week ago. It's science fiction sort of political thriller about aliens who come to Earth and are Catholic. They were Catholic when they got here, so and he takes that premise pretty seriously. But it's mostly sort of a thriller. The main character is a Latin teacher who's able to do the whole spoken Latin thing, and the aliens think that's what they need to speak to us in. So he gets dragged in. It's a little bit silly on the premise, but the execution was done quite seriously. I think it was I had a great time. So
Fantastic. Right. So where to begin? So Disquiet Gods. I don't know. Let's start from the prologue, because an author that starts by name checking Ronnie James Dio in the prologue, you got me there already.
I see them behind you right there.
Yes. Where does that come from?
Dio specifically, or in the context of the author's note. I've been a heavy metal guy for most of my life, and Dio is my guy. I actually own furniture from his house. I bought from his estate sale. But yeah, I have one of the beds from the house.
So that's where the big money from the books has gone into.
Yes. We saw that the estate sale was happening online, and I meant to buy like a book or something, but all the small items were more competitive. So to win an auction, I had to get furniture, because who was going to buy furniture? But it's cool. As far as his reference there in the it was a very cheesy way to just sort of sign out on the author's note. The author's note mostly is about why the book is from a different publisher. And it would not have come out at all at the time had it not been for my readers basically keeping interest alive sufficiently that other publishers wanted the book at all. Because I had some trouble. Things are good now, much better. In fact, things are sort of smoothed out. But it's been a very weird year, 18 months, something like that, and it was not clear what was going to happen for a while, and now everything is great. Series will get finished. It'll get finished the way I want it to get finished, and that is due to my readers. It's due to Bane Books and to Daw, who has a complicated role in the story, and to Dave as well, because Dave edited book 6, and it would not be what it is without Dave. So
yeah, because is it strange to switch publishers almost halfway or 2/3 into a series?
Yeah, usually you just get canceled. It is very unlikely that if a series is dropped, it's usually for purely for financial reasons, for lack of sales. Contracts are just not renewed, or sometimes are dropped. And when it happens, there's very little financial incentive for another publisher to pick the series up. The story here is a little bit more complicated, but it's very strange for another publisher to come in and pick up a series after it's done. I will say that Bane has something of a habit of doing this. Habit may not be quite the right word. They've done it in the past. Dave mentioned the Liaden books by Sharon Lee and Steve Miller, who Steve passed away, I think, earlier this year. And my understanding is that series 2, I think the first 3 books ran at Ace Books maybe in the 90s, maybe the 80s. It's been going on for a while, and then they had discontinued it, and Bane picked it back up and resuscitated it. So they have some experience doing this kind of thing. A couple other series don't leap to mind top of my head, but I know they've done it other times before. So it's partly sort of in their wheelhouse to do this kind of thing if they see something, sort of potential, let's say. But circumstances around this were certainly very strange, for sure.
And David, was that a bit of a homecoming? Because I know Christopher started at Bane before becoming an author. He was an editor there. So what did that feel like? Because did you work with him before he went away and came back?
Yeah. So I met Christpher when I was only an author at Bain. So there's sort of a shoes on the other foot kind of thing, to be honest. So when I met Christpher, was at in Chattanooga at LibertyCon, and he was probably, your title was something like junior editor or editor something.
Editorial assistant probably at that point.
Editorial assistant.
That was my first year, I think.
Yeah,
at Bain, officially at Bain. I was an intern, but
I think that's right, and I think it's before book one came out, as I recall. So look, Bain, Christpher is very loved at Bain, and I will say that all of this is Christopher's story to tell and not mine. But one of the reasons why he has come through this all triumphantly is his success in reaching a reader base and his fans, and that is just entirely to his credit. Something else that I think really helped him come back to Bain was just that people there, and in particular Tony Weisskopf, were just big fans of Christpher Ruocchio and wanted to make sure that his series could be completed the way he wanted. So it was exciting to have him. And then when, for reasons, it made sense for him to kind of go back to DAW, that was, everyone was happy to cheer on his success.
Mm. And then another thing that is mentioned in the prologue, and then we can start talking about the book proper maybe later, is the amount of editing that got cut out of there. It's like literally almost a novella. Like, what was it, 9,000 words or something like that?
Oh no, it was like 40. It was like
40,000. Yeah, 40,000. So
yeah,
David, like, what was that exchange like? Because that must have been a lot of email exchanges and a lot of conversations for 40,000 words.
Yeah, it was an interesting process. So first of all, we had to negotiate with Tony how long the book could be, and that involved educating her how long the books were that she had already published, because her first response was something like, and I'd have to go back and look at the emails, but something like, "Oh, we've never published a book over 200,000 words," and we had to go back and say, "Well, it turns out we have. Here are some of the books that you published and how long." So literally, we were Googling, what is the longest David Weber novel ever published? And we get like lists online by word count of how long David Weber's novels were, and or how many words, what's the word? Monster Hunter International omnibus, and so we talked with Tony, and she initially wanted a much more dramatic cut. And we sort of negotiated a modest cut, and then I think we ended up landing just a bit above what we negotiated with her, which was fine, right?
Yeah, we cheated a little bit. Yeah,
she knew that the sacrifice had been made. The sacrifice was real, right? And it's still longer than it's the longest of the 6, right?
It's barely shorter than book 3 by like 2,000 words.
Oh, I didn't know that. Okay, interesting.
Yeah, barely. And they're really close.
So what's going to happen? Oh, where are these 40,000 words? Are they in some drawer there on your desk?
No, they're just in an earlier Word document. The thing about it, as I have gone on, my books have gotten longer, but they've gotten longer not because I'm out, there's like more story. The chapters have gotten longer, and I think that this is a result of like focus and attention issues. When I was writing the first couple of books, I was like by myself, right? I have a wife now. I have an 18-month-old. Like, I'm getting interrupted more, and because of this, I think I'm spinning my wheels more to get sort of back into it. And so the book was sort of fat, basically. It wasn't long. It was fat, and so all of the words that Dave and I removed. We actually added a chapter in cutting all of these words. We did not. No scenes were cut or anything. It was just whole sentences, and it was clauses in sentences. We sort of degassed the whole thing, which honestly is a step in the process I wish had been done to the other ones, because I think I've had people comment repeatedly that this book feels a lot tighter and cleaner than some of the other ones do, and that is all down to Dave's influence. Dave basically went through the whole book and highlighted stuff. He was like, I think like maybe we could do without this sentence, right? Maybe you said this thing 3 times already, right? Pay attention, Christopher. No, I'm kidding. But he highlighted stuff everywhere. You know, maybe cut a whole Dunsany reference that I cried about. It's like, maybe we don't need the whole poem, and I'm like, it wasn't the whole poem. It was just a few lines. So we cut all that stuff out, and when we did that, we got down from about 322,000 words to I think 284. So it's about 40,000 words.
With adding a scene, right? With adding a scene,
and then added a chapter into it too. So we actually probably cut more like 45, and then I added something like between 3,000 and 5,000 words back to the book, which was chapter I think 5. I think was the chapter that got out. It was pretty early. It was just something I wish I had more time on. You know, and so we managed to do that without really altering the story at all. It was just sort of cutting my rambling down.
Christopher is doing himself a disservice. It's just that in any ordinary communication, right? You're speaking, you're writing. We just, as humans, our mode of communication is not as taut and lean as it could be, right? And that's not a problem, except when you're in a circumstance where you really need to get rid of 20 to 40,000 words. And then it turns out that you start looking at sentences and saying things like, even like, I could remove this adjective here, right? Or we've already implied this, let's not state it objectively. And so literally, this is an exercise I've had to do myself. And Christopher is describing exactly what happened. I went through and highlighted text. I said, if it were me, this is the text I think I would cut. And he said, that's not the right stuff, but there's other stuff I could cut that's about the same length.
I would say I probably took your recommendations like 75% of the time. Like it was actually super easy. Dave would highlight a sentence, I would look at it and say, yeah, sure, like I don't need it, whatever. The thing about it that sucks though is that it did add up to about like a month, 5 weeks, 6 bad weeks of work, right? So if I could have avoided needing this step in the first place, like it would have been a whole month and more of my life that I would have saved, right? That would have been right. Nice. You know, I having the same problem now with book 7. It's actually open on the other screen right here. I'm on page 1183 of the Microsoft Word document. So it's very, very long. It's longer. I think it's almost as long as book 6 was on completion at this point. It's close. Yeah, probably tomorrow I'll pass that draft 1 of book 6 length. It's a nightmare. And the thing about it that's so troubling to me is that I fervently believe books should not be this long. Like I've like written myself into this problem. Partly that's like a purely economic question, because like we should talk about this, right? The reason that publishers, editors want books to be shorter, right, is partly artistic, right? I think that one metric by which you can evaluate a book's perfectness is if it has fat on it, right? I actually think you want as little fat on the book as possible. You want every sentence to be doing multiple things and to be doing them well and cleanly and not to need all this padding, right? So I think books should be shorter just in a platonic sense, but there are financial pressures on the publishing industry, right? Paper is expensive, right? And more than that, the physically larger a book is, the more shelf space it takes up in a store. And the more shelf space it takes up in the store means the fewer copies of it are going to get ordered. And the fewer copies of a book that get ordered means the fewer get printed. Because if you don't have orders for them to go to stores, what are you going to do? Sit them in your warehouse? Because the publisher has to pay rent on the books they put in warehouses. And so if your book is printed and sitting in a warehouse, it continues to cost them money. And so shorter books are safer economic propositions. And so it behooves you, especially as a new writer, not to write a giant book. Because what you're doing is setting yourself up for failure. You're printing, and this is what happened to me. This is part of why it took me a while to find an audience. I had these giant books, so they didn't print that many of them. And so they weren't that easy to find, and so people wouldn't just happen upon them unless they happened upon them digitally. And that's harder to do because you know, a needle in a haystack is actually easier to find than a bit on the internet. And so you know, it really, really isn't in your interest to write these giant books. And but part of it's artistic too. I think that you know, someone pointed out in a review I read of my work recently that all of the Book of the New Sun is shorter than this last book I'm writing, and maybe that's a problem actually, because if Gene Wolfe could say 8,000 times more than I could say in the same distance, maybe I should write better. And like I think maybe, you know, that's an apples to oranges comparison, right? Like we tend writing has changed stylistically in the last couple of decades, in part due, I think, to the influence of cinema on how we write. But there's something to that, right? If you know, if you can do, like I know I say this all the time, Robert E. Howard does more in a 20,000 word novelette than most fantasy writers do in a novel, and maybe that's a skill we should get back, and that's something I've been thinking about. Not so much for this last Sun Eater book, but for the next one, I need to figure out how it is people used to write, and maybe do more of that and write shorter.
Because
I recommend self-publishing because you have to pay for each word. So it was something I learned early on. I have to be very succinct. I have to find a way to tell a story in less than 300 pages, and it was a hard. It is still very hard.
Yeah, because it'll chew into your margins. You know,
as well.
especially if you're self-publishing. Yeah.
But the book is obviously sizable, but the reading doesn't feel like a slog. At least this book, it didn't feel sloggy to me at all. It's like all of a sudden you are in page 400, and there are different tonal shifts, and I think there are definitely certain sort of marked differences along the book. So, Susana, how did that feel for you? Like, you know, it's a big book, but it doesn't feel like it's going to drag on.
No, it doesn't even. It was the right length to tell that story. You know, at no point it felt like it was dragging, or I was just reading stuff that I was receiving any sort of information I didn't need. I mean, I was enjoying it all the way through and was engaged all the way through. And then I liked it how it shifted. It started as it seemed like it was going one direction and then completely turning into something else. So it was like reading two books in one. But to have split it into that would work.
Yeah, because Ian, we both you and I had the same impression about the beginning of the book, isn't it?
Yes, definitely. I mean, I got that. I don't know if anyone else got this. I think Jose did. I got a big Alien and the Thing vibe from the very first part of the book, where just people are dying mysteriously, but for some reason, it's the Thing just really stood out to me. Is that kind of where you were going with that, Christopher?
Well, not specifically. I love Who Goes There, and I do love the Thing, the Carpenter film particularly, but I hadn't thought about it too specifically. But it is one of my favorite movies. Certainly favorite horror films. So it's never too far. But it wasn't a conscious sort of thing. But I can certainly see why you would think that. It's got a very similar setting. A thing I was thinking about actually was The Terror, Dan Simmons's novel, and just the sort of and sort of like, this is like a very silly sort of detail, but in like the way that the geography of Sabratha is like pretty straightforward. It's like William Land and stuff like that, right? If you look at polar regions on Earth, like they have these like very sort of basic, like we name them after the king and then put the word land after them. Antarctica's like that. And sort of the northern reaches of Canada are like that as well. Native names notwithstanding. So I was thinking about that. I think I'd just seen the show, or was watching the show around the same time. So I'd gone back and I'd read the book, and so there was a little bit of that in there. I'm a big Dan Simmons fan too, which probably surprises nobody. So there's a bit of a polar expedition sort of thing there as well, right? So I circled back around to the Thing the long way around.
I'm going to ask my stupid question for the night, and then I hope that everyone else has got something a bit more intelligent to say. There was a moment when I was reading the book that I had a sort of like a chuckle there, so an evil chuckle, David.
Uh-oh.
One of the spaceships is called Two Dreams of Spring. Is there some kind of veiled reference there to some unfinished fantasy series, or is it just my imagination?
No comment. No comment. Most of the extrasolarian ships are named after paintings, so it might be doing. Can't remember for sure if it's doing double duty there or not. But it may well be.
So when you read that, David, did you just read on?
I'm happy to let the author pick any fights he wants. That's not a problem.
Fair enough.
Well, I was not nearly so pointed as certain Larry Correa dedications. So,
yeah. No, fair enough.
Yeah.
And then, so in this book, Hadrian is a father now, and I think that very obviously mirrors your personal experience, Christopher. Now, so David, have you got children as well?
I do. Yeah,
right.
3.
So, that's brave. Christopher, have you started going through the rites of passage of a parent? So, like, have you already had like those poo explosions?
Sure.
That take 2 people to clean a kid and stuff like that.
Oh yeah, no. I mean, my daughter's 18 months, so plenty of that. Yeah.
Yeah.
No, right now you'll think this is funny. In particular, Jose. I've had her listening to Dio. I've been playing concerts on my TV. She thinks televisions can only do one thing. So this television plays rock concerts. The one downstairs plays Mr. Rogers. She never asks for the other thing in the other place. But she will hammer on my office door and say rock and roll, and I have to bring her up here and let her watch Dio. So no. She's been around a minute now.
Yeah.
So,
and have you had the poo floating in the bathtub already?
Actually, we have dodged that particular one so far. That hasn't happened yet. So don't curse.
David smiled there, so it must have happened.
I've had it. Yep. We've had that.
Yeah. And then you've got the walls being painted. Prepare for that as well.
Yeah, we're not there yet.
Yeah. So. I have a bunch of my books. They tend to be larger ones, which because they were heavier, I'd always shelve big hardback volumes. I'm not talking about novels. These are like big reference books on the bottom shelf of the bookcase. And there's a bunch that have just kind of a meandering marker across the spine. From the day when I stopped shelving my large hardbound books on the bottom shelf of the bookcase.
Exactly. So and you make some some thoughts and some musings about parenting, obviously in the book, Christopher.
Yeah.
How is that sense of responsibility coming along?
It is preeminent, like at all times, right? Most of the book actually was written before my daughter was born. That chapter we added is the solitary exception, actually, because I got the cover art the same day she was born. I was in the hospital and got the email. It's like, oh, this is funny. This is good timing, right? Because there was Cassandra, right? Not that my daughter is, the inspiration for the character, really. I didn't know my daughter yet. But that was a funny coincidence. But no, I mean, look, almost all the adults my whole life basically made having kids very scary. Like, oh, it's a lot of work, poop, whatever, right? It's going to be hard. Your life will never be the same, and it isn't the same, right? But it's so much better than my life was before that I'm like kind of angry at all of the baby boomers and the Gen X people who told me that it was going to be this awful, miserable, life-changing experience, the best thing that's ever happened to me, except for getting married. Getting married has a leg up in part because, it was a necessary stepping stone to getting here, right? So no, I love being a father, and wouldn't trade it for the world.
Absolutely. It's a never-ending battle, isn't it?
No, that's for sure. But do you want to go through life not having trials, right? Besides this one, this trial, also, there's this tiny person who demands to watch rock concerts and wants to climb in my chair and thinks the magnets on my wall are really, really cool. That's way better than not.
Mm-hmm. Yeah. Come on, Susana. Let's bring this back into topic. What's your next question?
My questions. I only have 2 questions, so I guess I can ask one. We were talking about marketing and how much you've done to find an audience and to reach fans. And these days, pretty much every author, it doesn't matter if they are self-published or not, they have to do that. And you seem to be doing it pretty well. So what advice, tips would you give a struggling author just trying to find an audience?
I think I lost you for a second there. I'm sorry, it lagged pretty bad.
So I was asking for any tips or advice you would give a daughter to find its audience in social media and YouTube. These days we have to do our own marketing. Still no?
Yeah. Okay, I think I got it. It was still breaking up a little bit, but you, tips for finding, helping an author find their audience.
That's right.
I don't know, but yeah. So I think the most important thing is to just editing YouTube video. Not that takes no time, right? Or with you're competing in this insane attention economy, right? And so one of the things that you have to do is find other things to give your readers so that they don't the novellas between novels. Because when it can be a lot faster, and so I would be able to. I could get an outline to publication. Probably it depends. Really, the real gating factor is going to be the artist.
Is it worth Christpher? So I think I'm having a hard time seeing Christpher, but none of you.
It keeps breaking.
No, I can't. Yeah.
Sorry. Christpher, is it worth disconnecting and trying again? Because I love what you're saying, but I'm only catching about 10% of it.
Yeah. Hang on. I'm gonna. I'm gonna just.
Unfortunately, if you're talking, no, it's actually no. You're trying to save bandwidth, but we're still barely hearing anything you say.
Yeah.
David, so while we get Christpher back on, So had you read all of the previous books in the series?
Yes.
Is that prerequisite to edit like the 6th book in a series?
Well, I don't think it was a prerequisite because I don't think the previous editor was doing the work, but it should be a prerequisite. Some series are more, I mean, this is one arc, right? This is one story from beginning to end. Not every series works like that. There are plenty of series. I've edited a number of books in 1632. I've read the first one. I have not read all 40, right? Mm-hmm. I did before reading book 6, went back and I had read, I think, maybe books 1 through 3 before then. So I went back and reread those. So from the beginning, 1 through 5. And I think in this case, because it is one continuous arc, I think it would be basically professional malpractice to do anything different. It would be, you could proofread the book jumping in at book 7 or book 6, but that's all you could really do.
Right. Because throughout the process, were there any sort of internal consistency issues or any sort of contradictions that you guys found while you were working on the project?
I mean, that's one thing you're looking for, but I think the bigger thing is sort of like having a sense of where the book is going, where the book wants to go, what its themes are, who the characters are coming into book 6, right? It's not so much saying, oh, hey, this character was a redhead, right? Or that character, only had one arm or something. I mean, that might be a thing.
Mm-hmm.
But it's more being aware of what the story is about and what the tone was in the previous 5.
Right. I think we got Christopher back on. I think you were trying to tell us good ways to grow your audience as an aspiring author in social media.
In general, just how to put yourself out there
Yeah.
and
Yeah.
find your readers.
You guys getting me okay now?
A little better. Boy, it's still a little iffy.
Mm.
I'm used to it being me that has the bad connection. I thought at first that I was seeing you slowly because it was my end. Then I realized I could see everyone else fine, blinking in real time.
Nominally hit fiber, so I don't know.
Well, I mean, hopefully you'll get back on because we're doing fine for half an hour. So maybe a question that I want to put out there for everyone, because watching a couple of reviews of the book, there seems to be some kind of general consensus that this book is where the series gets weird, whatever that may mean. Ian, did you get that feeling while reading this book? Did it get a little bit weird?
Oh yeah, definitely. That whole we can do spoilers, I'm assuming right now, like good with that. The whole he melted and then he went forward in time. That was probably the trippiest thing that I've read in a book in a long time. Yeah, like I don't remember reading anything like that before. Like that was like not only he killed him again. I've never read a book where the main character dies not only once, but he dies twice, basically. Like that's new to me.
That was a hard scene. Right? I mean, he sloughs apart. He falls apart. Yeah.
What's happening? Am I reading this right? How are you going to get out of this one now?
Yeah.
Exactly.
Yeah. And then you get a kind of a Madeline L'Engle sort of sequence, right? Like suddenly you're in a planet that's so far out in space that the sky is dark, right? Yeah.
Oh yeah, go ahead.
Well, I was going to say, although to your point, the character had been killed before.
Yeah. Yeah.
Yeah.
Which I've never read a book like that where, like, when he first died, I was like, oh, are we going to go to a different narrative? Like, oh, is this what this book is doing? No, we're going to continue on. Trippy, I would say.
Yeah. Yeah, when Hadrian first, so when I was reading it myself, and Hadrian dies we're talking spoilers now. When Hadrian dies for the first time in book 4, I thought, oh man, I knew it. The Hadrian that's narrating is not the same as the Hadrian that's born. He's a clone, right?
Okay.
That's not the case, right? But that's where I went. So yes. The dying and reviving man more than once. I like it, but it is, yes, it was a surprise. Maybe it was a surprise because it was the second time, right?
Yeah, definitely. Like like was what Susana was saying, like, how are we going to get out of this thing? Like, but Jose, what do you guys got? What's the most trippy thing you've read here in this book? I think that was mine.
Susana?
That surprised me, yes. And I was also very impressed at the beginning of all the weird stuff happening. Oh gosh, I forgot the name of the planet that he goes to kill the Watcher. But it felt like I was in an X-File episode. It's just a little aside. Like, I'm kind of immune to cosmic horror, apparently, according to my husband, because he keeps trying to make me read cosmic horror, and I'm always, I don't get it. I think I felt a bit of that dread, that just the grand scale, the cosmic scale of just how weird things got to the point. I was delighted just visualizing everything. You see, oh, this is awesome. So I wasn't afraid, but it was odd, just very well done.
I actually thought sort of the weirdest. Well, maybe weird is not a sufficiently specific adjective. The most shocking, maybe, was for me not the dying scene, although that was big. But in the end, where there's and I'm forgetting his name, but the sort of clone, bloated, misshapen, grotesquely mutated, enormous clone in the lake. Right?
Oh,
Brethren. Yeah. That was like, oh yeah, this is an abomination, right? The moral grotesquerie is brought home to us with a physical image, right? This is physically hard to think about.
The bit I struggled to wrap my head around in this book is these watchers, like this.
Oh, me too.
These gods things. It's like, what are they? Because is this some kind of form of raw energy, but they kind of escape the planet because there's a magnetic field, but then they transmit themselves and they escape. It's like, what is this thing? It's nothing like I haven't read anything before quite like this. So my ongoing struggle with the series, I suppose, is that in my head I've got sci-fi, but it's not. It's sci-fi, science fiction, fantasy. It's heavy on the fantasy, so it's coming to terms with that. We were talking, Christopher, that a lot of people seem to think that this book is where things got really weird. So
yeah, that was the hope, because part of the problem that I've had, right, is that my original plan had been to start out in this very familiar place, right, and then to sort of work the story into being my own story, right. I wanted to. My sense is as a kid was that if I do that, then people will say, "Hey, I like all this stuff that Christopher's talking about. I like Dune. I like Star Wars, whatever." And then for it to get progressively not to that. And if I went wrong anywhere, it was maybe being too familiar at the beginning. And so, I see a lot of reviews on book one that say things like, well, I already know how this is going to end. One, because he told us, and two, because I read Dune. And actually wrong on both counts. It's just was never the point. The point was always to get to its own place. It just required a little time. And it required that the reader expect that the story was going to be one thing. And some people, I guess, just didn't have the patience to keep reading. And that's fine. I have no expectation that somebody has to read the books. But this was sort of always the plan, was things were going to get progressively insane as things have gone on. And that's continued. We have that, we have the science fantasy thing, right? And what does that mean? And what does that look like? And because these are two genres that I think in a lot of people's heads, even though they like both of them, right, are sort of philosophically in contradiction, right? Fantasy is very romantic. It's very sort of backwards looking. Science fiction is very rational, we think, and very forward looking. And it belongs to the sort of modern age and the scientific age, and that ethos and fantasy does not, right? And this is a false dichotomy. right? It has always been a false dichotomy. Science fiction, if you step back far enough, is just fantasy with a different worldview, right? There's not a lot of space between Vulcans and elves, as I say all the time. And we're quick to say that magic is, only a form of technology we don't understand. We look to Clark. But the reverse might also just well be true, right? There might not be, a division between one form of knowledge and another, right? One of Thomas Aquinas' famous examples of occult powers is magnetism, actually, because we didn't understand it in the 1200s. And if that pattern continues, why not, right? And this is all stuff I sort of wanted to mess with the series, and we just had to get there, and we're getting there in these last couple of books. As an aside, is the signal working better now?
Much better. Yeah.
Did I fix
Yeah.
it? Okay.
Yeah, and to that point, I was just going to say there's a comment in the chat, but also we want to get the answer to Susana's very good question.
Yes.
Which was about strategies for connecting with your readers, right? Being available to the audience.
Yeah, sorry about the signal trouble there. So to the chat question I just saw about how much was outlined in advance, very little of it. I had sort of a wish list of things I wanted to happen. I knew what the ending was. I know what the ending is. Haven't quite written it yet. But I knew a bunch of like scenes along the way, and I would sort of figure it out a book at a time and discover that I needed another book, or learn that I was getting the book split in half, whether I wanted it to or not, or whatever, right? And I had to sort of adjust to the sort of external pressures as I went. But I would learn what the book was one book at a time, and then outline it, and then work off that outline, and change the outline as I went, and all of that. To get back to the question I was answering before the internet rudely interrupted me, so in terms of finding your audience, right, the most important thing you could do is show up. I remember I was talking to Tony Weisskopf at Bain about this webcomic that I used to like, and I'd grown to despise, and I was still reading it every single day. And I'd done this for months, and I was complaining about it at work. I was like, I don't know why I do it. Every morning I get up and I read these 2 webcomics, and they both make me angry. And she's like, well, how long have you been reading them? I was like, 5-6 years. She was like, oh, that's interesting. Do they come out every day? And I was like, every weekday, yeah. She's like, there's the problem, right? And the lesson I took away from this is that the mere fact that these stories were being presented to me on a regular basis, reliably, meant that I would continue to read them even though I hated them. And that was very educational, right? I immediately stopped reading them once I had this pointed out to me. I've never gone back. But there's a certain sort of gravitational pull to these things, right? And if you can find something to give your readers frequently enough that they don't leave, then you're fine, right? Because what you want as any kind of artist, right, as an author, as a comic book person, as a painter, a musician, whatever, is you want a core group of people who don't leave, right? Because then you have something that's dependable, right? And if that's 100 people, awesome. If it's 1,000 people, even better. 5,000 people is great, right? And the reality is that as a writer, if you have like a core committed readership of a couple thousand people, like you might actually do well enough to at least afford like your family vacation, right? If not like your whole life, depending on where you live, right? And that's a big number, but it's not an impossibly big number at all, right? You can work toward that, and all you have to do is find other things that you can do. Now, giving someone a book every week is impossible, right? But maybe you could do short stories, right? Maybe you use a platform like Patreon to get those short stories to people. You get people to commit to paying you $5 a month or something like that, and that can snowball, right? Those numbers can stack up. I started writing these novellas because I was ahead of my publisher by so much that I needed something else to give them. And I needed something else to give my readers in between normal releases. And so between a book, I could put out a novella, and maybe I had enough short stories together, I could put out a short story collection. And if you stagger those enough, right, and you combine those with just like, I have this sense that I should always be updating my readers about what I'm doing. If you just communicate frequently enough, people don't forget about you, and then they show up for the thing, because they have to know what you're doing to buy it, right, or to care about it. And so building this whole sort of, ecosystem around whatever it is you're doing is really the thing, because you don't want people to leave. So just have to find a way to, especially to not duplicate work, right? So like I will show chapters early of, say, book 7, right, on the Patreon. I don't have to write that chapter twice. It's going in the book, and it's something I can give readers early, right? Same with short stories or something like that. If you can find a way to have everything that you're doing pull double duty in some way and sort of recycle. Like you could show, for example, one thing you could do if you're self-published, right? You have control over your covers. Your author maybe gives you your artist gives you a couple thumbnails. Maybe you could show those thumbnails to your readers, right? And you could, is that's just an extra step. You don't have to do any more work for that. You could have them even vote if you wanted to. You could say vote for your favorite, right? You don't have to say vote to pick the cover, right? As you might not agree with them, and they need to get over that. But you can cut people in on things like that, and that doesn't greatly increase the amount of work that you do. When I sat down to organize my Patreon, for example, my question was, what's the most value I can give my readers for as little actual time as possible, right? Because I need that time to write books. But, you want to be able to do stuff at the same time that brings people in. And so, you should always be asking these sorts of questions just in order to make sure that you can build that sort of core audience. So that's why I do Q&A live streams every month on YouTube, right? This is why Brandon Sanderson signs and answers questions online, because if you're going to be stuck signing a bunch of books, like, you may as well talk to people. If there's some other writing related task that you could do and also live stream, maybe you should, right? If that's a skill set that you have, right? Like maybe you're not a person who's, good at speaking in front of a camera. Lord knows, I don't think I've looked at mine this whole rant, but you play to your strengths, whatever they may be, and find a way to give your readers as much as you can.
That's good.
Thank you. Great. That's a great answer.
I have a question.
Uh-oh.
One of the themes, maybe, arguably, is the sort of ship of Theseus.
Yeah.
As human beings become changed, as anything becomes changed, is there some point at which it is no longer? At what point is it no longer the thing it started out as? Right.
Yeah.
I wanted to ask you how you think about that in terms of yourself, because you've been working on this now for 10 years,
something like that. Yeah.
Right. And a lot of things have happened. You've gotten changed jobs, you've gotten changed publishers, you got married, you had a child, right? Do you think about yourself with that kind of metaphor ever, or is there some reflection in the books of a self-perception where you feel like you're not the same person you were when you started?
I know I'm not the same person. I'm not 18 anymore, right? Like there's continuity always, right? But like we're not the same person day to day sometimes, I think. That's not the royal we, I mean people. Just make sure everyone knows, not Smeagol.
We are not the same person, peasant.
Quiet. Yeah. But no, I think everybody changes significantly. I think for me, it's very easy. As the Christopher that started writing the books, I mean, I had this big problem I gave myself. I wrote an evil space church, and then became Catholic again. And then I was like, oh no, what do I do with this book that I've sold and I'm now accountable for, that has this thing in it that really bothers me? And I had to figure out how to deepen the narrative and account for this, right? And adjust for this like huge sort of personal shift that I'd experienced, right? And the thing about that's really useful is there's a certain analogy then between the Hadrian on the page and the Hadrian that's writing the story, right? Because the Christopher who wrote the book and the Christopher who's writing the book now, who's editing the book, right, and who's writing the later books, is not the same guy. Hope they're okay. And so that ended up being a really great opportunity, actually, to explore the distance between those two Hadrians as well as sort of it's not autobiographical, but in a sort of analogical sense, right? And there are like a lot of other ways in which like I've committed to an idea and then like had either a change in perspective or like a realization about something. It's like it would be like way more interesting actually if this or both and or something, right? Because the thing about the world, right, is that it isn't straightforward at all. And the advantage that storytelling, the drama has over polemic, over political essays, right, is that like actually you could say a thing and its opposite in a drama, and then like either see what happens if you want, right, or just take your thumb off the scale and see how readers feel about it, and like their opinions will vary, and if they disagree with you about your own work, like maybe that's okay. Like I know what I mean and like what I'm trying to say, and if someone comes away with the opposite reading, that could be because I didn't, do a very good job of communicating, or it could be because I couldn't reach that person in the first place, and maybe that's fine. Or maybe they just really, really agree with a different character for some reason, even if I think that character is wrong. And all of those are okay, I think. And, I think as a storyteller, it behooves us to not worry about that so much and tell the story. And, because like you can't, the greatest tragedy of my life is that I can't control other people's thoughts, right? It would be great. It'd be great if everybody read the book and was like, this is the best book I've ever read. $10 million. Here you go. Right. But like that can't happen. So, maybe letting go is a good thing, which is also a way in which I am not 18-year-old Christpher. So
that's great. And it's kind of goes along with some of the more metaphysical aspects of the book every now and then. And you mentioned the Catholic thing, or it's been mentioned in the conversation a couple of times. And this is something that I wanted to pick with you because in the Lesser Devil novella, Brother Crispin becomes a Christian, right?
He becomes more sympathetic to it.
Right. Okay.
Yeah. He doesn't convert.
Okay, because in my head he was kind of there, and then he's got a very unchristian behavior towards Hadrian in this book, and I was trying to okay, get that straight in my head. Was he kind of more converted or more Christian? Because he absolutely repudiates Hadrian, and it's a very unchristian behavior. So
that is true. Yeah. Well, there's a large span of time between the end of the Lesser Devil and that scene in Disquiet Gods. And Crispin's been through some stuff that I haven't gotten to write about. We haven't gotten to write about yet, if I get to write about it at all. And this is one of the challenges with having this big series be one point of view, is that there's a lot of sort of character movement that isn't showable, much less shown, right? And this is one of the problems too with all these big time jumps, is that like between books especially, characters are like not the same person anymore because so much time has passed, and it's a very hard thing to account for. And there are times when Hadrian will go away and he'll come back, and a person will not be the same human being anymore because it's been 100 years, right? Or that other person has lived, for 30, or that character is exactly the same place and Hadrian has moved, because Hadrian will be frozen for however long or something like that, and this is a very hard thing to get right, because it's so unlike our own experience of time, right? And yet it isn't, right? Because like you do see this, like you have friends who suddenly they just stop talking to you, right? And you don't know what happened or whatever, and it's just broken. And so it's very difficult to show all of that stuff happening. It's partly why I wanted to write the novellas, do the short stories, is so that you could get a sense that Hadrian's perceptions of the world and the characters that he gives us in the books aren't always absolute, and there's like things that are missing. Notably, right, Crispin points out that Hadrian did not acknowledge their mother's passing at all, right? Like that was a problem for him, right? Maybe especially because of his sort of not conversion, but near conversion, let's say, or his changes and sympathies, and his greater understanding of their mother too, because Crispin, there's a story about Crispin and his mother, and so and like what his mother may or may not have done for Hadrian and all of that, right? So there's stuff that's happening off screen that we aren't getting coverage for, and of course the other thing too on this point specifically is there is a very great gap between the Platonic, ideal behavior of a Christian, right, which is Christ, and our actual behavior, right? There's that Gandhi quote about how he likes Christ but not Christians because they're not very Christ-like, and like that's actually the point, Mohandas. We all fall short, and
Yes.
I didn't actually need you to point that out. So thanks for that. That Gandhi quote has always annoyed me. So even if Crispin were to have converted, his failure in this point, I don't think disqualifies any putative belief or lack thereof on his part.
Ian, anything specific you want to bring up, or any questions you had?
I actually do have a question for Christopher. So you've got a lot of characters in this series. So I was kind of always wondering about like fantasy authors, sci-fi authors. Do you know, like, not just Hadrian, I'm talking about like side characters. Do you know their arc before you start writing? Do you know that they're going to have to die here? Or are you just kind of writing and you're like, you know what, I'm going to have to kill this person? Or, I was kind of curious on side characters, like in their arcs.
Yeah, it depends on the character, right? Dave, you can speak to this too, right? Sometimes you have a character who has like a very specific narrative function, and you like bake that into who they are, right? And that's usually the more important side characters because they're a bigger part of the story, right? Or at least you conceive of them as a bigger part of the story. These are characters like Valka or like Basander or Edward, right? These are characters that I've like had plans for the whole time. But then there are characters who might show up in like a really inconsequential way and then who stick around for way longer than you would think. And then the question becomes like, what do I do with this character? Sometimes the answer is nothing, right? Maybe it's not much. Like maybe they're just kind of there, and then an opportunity to have them do something will present itself and you take it, right? I'm a big outliner, but I also am like very open to like momentary inspiration. If something feels right at the time, like I'll change a plan because I'll trust that instinct. Like those sort of unconscious, subconscious mechanisms are usually the smarter parts of ourselves. You're sitting down and you intuit that like the story choice might be a good one. Like maybe it's better not to second guess those. And you just like, hey, I'll do that. But then there are a lot of characters that like, I have to kill somebody and it can't be these people, right? Or somebody has to stay behind for this reason. Who could it be, right? And that ends up making the character more important. So like Siran's arc in the series wasn't really planned, but somebody needed to stay on Colchis, and it couldn't have been any of the other characters because I needed them for other things. And so in doing so, I found something for her to do, right? For example, and that worked out because she didn't really have a thing. She was like the extra Myrmidon, and so she had a function. So all of a sudden, which was nice. I don't know about you, Dave, but I'm sure you must feel some kind of similar way about this.
100%. I mean, if Obi-Wan Kenobi is doomed from the minute he accepts to become Luke's teacher, because for Luke to finish his quest, Obi-Wan has to die, right? Or he has to at least not be there so that the quest is safe for Luke. You knew from book one that Dumbledore was at some point going to die. And sure enough, he did. Yeah, spoiler. To the 4 people who are unaware on the planet that Albus Dumbledore does not die. Yeah, it's in book, I don't know, something. 6, I don't know. I stopped reading to my kids in book 5. I couldn't take it anymore. I don't actually know how the series ends. But yeah, there's a certain amount of finding. My experience, like Christopher's, in writing a long series is, knowing where it's going is not incompatible with making changes along the way and figuring out how I'm going to get to where it's going. And sometimes you see that a character is going to end up in a different place than you thought, so that the main characters go to where you want them to go all along.
In one of the last interviews I had with authors, I recommend watching the one with Thomas J. Devens, because he said that in his series, at one point, he just rolled dice and just killed off a few of his characters in that manner. He felt like some deaths were needed, so he just rolled dice and dealt with that. Is that something you would even contemplate, or does that sound like sacrilege to you?
I wouldn't do it. I think that's. I mean, so like real life is that random sometimes, but that feels, I think, too frivolous for me. Um,
I feel like
but sometimes I do just decide someone has to go. But sorry, Dave.
it seems like you would be sort of at that point surrendering any other kind of meaning that your story had to the moral that actually everything is just random. Like whatever had been set up with the plants and the arc of this character, now randomly they're going to live or die, right? And art is not life. Art is structure that gives meaning to something that looks like life, right? And so it seems to me that rolling a 20-sided die to determine which characters live and die is to betray art.
Yeah, I think I will co-sign that. Yeah, here's the thing, right? It's like you may believe that life is completely random, and maybe it is, but storytelling isn't actually. Like storytelling for sure has a god, and it's you. Like you're in the chair, and you are actually making decisions. And if the universe that you are creating is meaningless, then your readers will actually notice that, and they will be like, "What? This is cheap," right? Because eventually, right? Like, I mean, look, I like A Song of Ice and Fire a lot, actually. But the thing is that George Martin has killed so many characters over the course of that series. He's got such a reputation for it that even the shock value, which was really the thing, right? The Red Wedding, right? Ned Stark's death, right? These are deeply shocking, right? And seemingly random acts of ultraviolence, right? They make no narrative sense. They defy the expectations of the genre, right? But he's done it so much that it's not shocking anymore. And if even the shock is gone, then everything is, right? Then all that is left is this sort of grinding, nihilism. By the time he introduced me to Quentin Martell and dragged me along with him, made me like him for a whole book, only for him to die achieving nothing and thus wasting I don't know how many hours of my time liking this poor boy. I gave up. Like I couldn't care anymore. Like it was one act of senseless nihilism too many, right? And you can only do so much of that before you lose people. You lose people, but like me, by communicating that everything means nothing, actually, which it doesn't. People don't really believe that about their own lives, most people, even if it is random. So life isn't like that. Yeah.
It's a pornographer's strategy to just be more shocking than the time before. And it runs into the pornographer's problem, which is at a certain point people are desensitized and you're like, well, like what now? Horses? Like what? Yeah. I would not randomly kill characters.
Okay.
I might deliberately kill a character that you didn't think was going to die, but I wouldn't do it randomly. And I wouldn't just constantly do it for the sake of breaking convention, shocking you, or showing Tolkien how he was wrong.
Yeah, I might do it with an evil laugh, though. I might sit here and be like, "Oh, you know what'll get them, right? This," and then do it. That might happen.
Yeah.
But it'd be pointed. Very
like having
considerate.
Hadrian melt, for example.
That was in the cards for a very, very, very long time. Yeah.
Some very Lovecraftian themes in this book. That sort of disappearing into a puddle of goo is very Lovecraftian.
Yes. Yeah. That was a very that image has been in my head for a very long time. And so I say this all the time. Like the thing about writing scenes that I've thought about for a large portion of my life is the minute I do, I stop obsessing about them. They're like gone. And so this is part of the reason I'm so excited to finish the series. I don't know like how much RAM thinking about the Sun Eater in particular has occupied in my brain for the last decade, but to have all of that processing bandwidth back will be quite shocking. I'll gain like 40 IQ points or something. So I'm looking forward to it. I have a couple months to go, but having all this done and behind me will be a very strange psychological experience.
Well, we'll get you back then. We got a question here from you from Ecuador. So Looking back,
Yeah.
would you change anything in the plot, or anything you think you could have done this way or that way?
I think I would have maybe signaled some of the later things earlier, more clearly, or at all, than I have. But as far as changing, maybe not. There are things I wish I could have included and haven't. I wish there'd have been. I wish I could have done more, like more of the battles in the war. Right. I wish that. I wish Sirianni could be more present in the story. The nature of the story demands that he have sort of Darth Vader's screen time, which is not actually very much of that movie, right? Thulsa Doom is in Conan, but so much. And I would have preferred, mostly it is in book 4, right? And I would have preferred to see more of the main villain, right? But it just hasn't really been possible, and I don't really know how I could make it possible. But I would have liked that to be true. So that's maybe my only one major regret. It's in book 7 a fair bit, but not nearly as much as I would have liked, because Sirianni actually is a character I enjoy writing, which is weird. Most of the villains give me a very hard time. Karnsagar is very hard. The Watchers are very hard, but Sirianni is actually quite delightful for me to write for whatever reason. That's a fun villain. And so I, not having had as much opportunity with it, has been a bit of a letdown for me. But that'll change soon, I think, because we're really getting into it here as I'm finishing up the last book. But
I am mindful of time. I could sit here talking to all of you forever, really, but I'm mindful I'm taking Christopher and David's afternoon, and Ian as well. So any last questions, Susana, from you, and then Ian?
I had a very similar question to Ian, but it was a bit cheekier, I guess. I was going to ask if you outlined the philosophical rambles that Adrian digresses to, because they are always in the right place. They don't detract from, at least for me, from the narrative. It's just exactly what I needed, a pause to just reflect, to just let the mind go. And every time, so I wonder if it was like purpose. So I'm going to insert philosophical rant here, insert here.
No, quite the opposite,
Yeah.
actually. I almost never make a note to do that sort of thing at all. I just sort of get to the place and I'm like, you know what? Hard stop. We're gonna ramble for 2 paragraphs and then get back to it. There's like a rhythm to prose, right? I talk about this a lot. Like one of my go-to bits of writing advice is to look at your paragraphs, look at their length, and look at how you're starting them. Because if every paragraph on the last 2 pages starts with dialogue, bro, it's time to do something different, right? You've got to change it up. And the same way too, if the paragraphs are all really, really long, like maybe you should switch back to some shorter actions, some dialogue. Because if you keep doing the same thing over and over and over again, people start to glaze. And so one of the ways out of that, if I notice that things have been very talky or they've been very staccato, right, in some way, action or otherwise, what we really need is to pause and slow down and do a couple of paragraphs. And it doesn't have to be very long, right? Get back into the character's head for a moment, and then you can go back. Because you want to change up the tempo for the same reason you want to change up the tempo in a musical piece, right? You don't want people to stop listening. You want to, bring them back. And that's really an instinctive thing. I just remind myself every page and a half or so to look at the paragraphs and make sure I haven't fallen into a trap. And I'll go back and I'll smooth something in just to keep it going. So.
Oh, hang on, David. Is everything he's saying true? Are you finding that in the book as you're editing it, or?
Yeah, absolutely. He's a superb prose writer. That's the biggest thing. Look, my contribution to the book was very small. The biggest thing I did was make a suggestion, a bunch of words to take out. And the whole point was, what can be taken out doing the least damage, right? And I think, in fact, the way I set it up was something like, look, I'm not suggesting deleting words because they're bad. I'm suggesting deleting these because we have to delete 40,000 words. And these are the ones that I would delete, right? And I think I had a couple of sort of questions about kind of plot continuity. How did these characters get through this moment or that? Christopher is a great prose stylist and getting better.
Thanks, man.
And Ian, have you got any parting questions?
So you're gonna be wrapping up this series with book 7, and then do you have any? What's next? Like, are you gonna? Like, I don't know if you can say anything, but yeah, do you have any future plans? Like, what's your next big project you're gonna be working on?
Well, I don't know definitively what the next thing is going to be. I have a lot of ideas. I think whatever it's going to be is going to be shorter, both in terms of book length and in terms of series length. In part to give myself a break. I have another kid on the way, actually, and so
Congratulations.
yeah,
Congratulations.
so I'm actually racing. I'm racing to finish the book. I'm trying to beat the baby, and so I expect that I will need to not get into another giant series for a couple of years. So I won't do another 7-book, 250,000 word a book thing for a minute. Trilogies certainly on the table, but like probably longer than that. I'm going to try to avoid just for sanity reasons. And like I said too, I think that I think that since it's clear that I have a difficulty writing shorter books, maybe I should challenge myself differently and sort of push that envelope. So I don't know. My publisher is very interested in my doing something unrelated next, so it won't be another Sun Eater thing. I do intend to keep doing Sun Eater stuff indefinitely. There'll be more novels. There'll eventually be another series in the universe. There'll certainly still be more short stories. Those are not going away because I have to do more short stories to buttress these special editions that I've been doing. And I'll be doing some more novellas in between new books and stuff. One of my UK special edition publishers wants me to do more novellas so that we can do more special editions. So I'll be doing those. But I do have, I should say, if you go to galaxysf.com, Galaxy Magazine, the old pulp magazine, is back. I have a story in issue 263, which I believe is free on the website. It was their first issue back, called The Barrow King. And The Barrow King is a fantasy story. And it might be the next thing. Might not be, but it might be the next thing. So if you want to go check that out, you can go read that literally right now.
Final question for me, and once again, thank you ever so much, both David and Christopher. It's always great talking to both of you, and you've been far too kind to me for no good reason. So thank you again. It's something we briefly emailed about, but I just wanted to put out there for people listening or watching, and it's getting your books translated into different languages. Obviously, we know they're not available in Portuguese or Spanish, and Christopher, you said it's an issue of there being no interest from any publisher in those countries. But what needs to happen? How does one go about acquiring the rights to foreign books and publishing them in different countries?
Yeah, so this sort of happens one of two ways, right? Either your agent goes to a foreign publisher or to a foreign book fair. For example, the Frankfurt Book Fair in Germany sort of drives the whole European market to a certain extent. Or the publishers come to you. And that's happened a couple of times. I got my Czech publisher, I believe, because they emailed and just asked. But usually it's been a function of my agent going to people and saying, hey, we have this book, or usually the agent will go to a publisher in, say, France and say, hey, I have all of these new books, like, which ones are you interested in? Right. And then the publishers will look and they'll say none of them, or this one, or these ones, or whatever. Certainly on the ground level, it doesn't hurt. So I don't know much, for example, about the landscape of Spanish publishing or Chinese publishing. But my readers, right, or readers generally, whether they're mine or not, will certainly know their own countries better than I do. And it wouldn't hurt to politely bother them on social media and say, hey, have you looked at this guy? Have you looked at that guy? Right. You know, I want to read Dave Butler's books in Swahili. Make it happen. Right.
The original Swahili.
The original Swahili, yes. The original Akkadian. But Dave's gonna get his book translated to Ugaritic. Anyway, but no, that's what you need to do. I will say though, on the subject of Spanish in particular, there's been a little bit of movement. Nothing definitive yet, but fingers crossed, as they say. So
very exciting.
And because does Bayern not have any ties? Do you not get involved with any of that? Like, does your US publisher have got nothing to do with a European publisher?
No, no. So you can though sometimes. It depends on what you sell in your contract, right? It is possible for you to part with your translation rights to your publisher. Publishers will sometimes try to buy them, and you can decide to sell them those rights or not. You can negotiate to keep them if you like, in the same way that you can negotiate to keep or sell your audiobook rights, right? So when you sell a book to a publisher, you're not selling them the book, right? You own the book. What you're selling them is a license to print and distribute the book under certain conditions, right? And so, for example, it is possible, I'm an American, right? I go to an American publisher and I could sell them world English rights, which means they could have the right to print and distribute the book in English everywhere in the world, or I can fractionate those rights out and they can have North America, right, which sort of includes former American, imperial territories like the Philippines, right? And so if you are in Manila, you can buy the DAW version of Empire of Silence, right? Whereas I then turned around and sold the book in English again to Golanx in the UK, and Golanx publishing still acts like the British Empire exists, basically. So the British publisher, the sun never sets on British publishing. They've got rights in like Australia, New Zealand, India, whole swath of Africa, right? And basically everywhere in the world that isn't the Western Hemisphere functionally. A couple exceptions. And so you can actually get paid for the book twice that way. And you could sell, the publisher could purchase the rights to all translations, in which case they would act as your agent and they would facilitate the sale of the book into Spanish, Chinese, right? Portuguese, Russian, French, German, whatever, right? Arabic, etc. And then they would get the agent's fee, basically, instead of an agent, or you could retain those. And if you have an agent, obviously it's in their interest to retain those rights so that they can sell them and they can make money instead of the publisher and so on, right? So it's just a question of negotiation. So
it's the murky world of publishing. It's just you probably need a law degree,
lawyers and contracts,
and you probably need a law degree and a gun in your briefcase, isn't it?
Yeah, well, it helps that like Dave's got the law degree, so I usually like call Dave before I even talk to my agent. I'm like, Dave, help. So,
right.
Dave, you're a lawyer. Save me.
Fantastic. Once again, I think we've been at it for over an hour and 20 minutes. So I am exceptionally grateful to everyone that was here tonight, both in the chat and obviously in the live conversation. Ian, Susana, we've been on this journey for years together now, and I'm very grateful to both of you. And obviously, David and Christopher, for giving us your time and your insights into the books and the publishing world. It's been great. So parting thoughts, David, where can people find you and your work?
My website is not updated, but more or less points at my novels, davidjohnbutler.com. My Twitter, I'm pretty active on Twitter, @DavidJohnButler. If they really want to interact with me, I will admit any reasonable person who asks to my Discord server as well. But Susana, mucho gusto. It's been good to meet you. Ian, thank you very much. And Jose, thanks for having me back.
No, nothing at all. It's my pleasure. And obviously, Christopher, I think anyone watching or listening knows where to find your stuff. But, last bit of self-promotion.
I guess the important thing, if anyone is watching, is going to be at Brandon Sanderson's Dragonsteel Nexus in like 2 weeks. I will be there in Salt Lake City. Look forward to seeing anybody. I will have books for sale. I may even have a couple of the printer run-over copies of the Diamond Edition. We have some extras from that. So if people want to grab one, we'll have some there. They don't carry rights or anything. They're just the extra ones because actually the shipping service didn't ruin a whole box. So we've got some spares. But I will be there. And then the paperback of Disquiet Gods actually comes out on the 17th of next month. So if you're looking for that to match your paperback collection that'll be here very, very soon. You can pre-order that now. And if you want to get a signed one, you can get a signed copy of any of my books, actually, at quailridgebooks.com. They're my local store. So
Fantastic. Ian?
You can find me at B&B Books. I do stupid, idiotic takes on books that I read. And if you want to follow them, come on over, B&B Books.
Fantastic. And Susana?
You can find me on Twitter or my YouTube channel, Den of the Weird, and you can find my books mainly on Amazon. Timelessness.
Well, fantastic. And once again, I don't think I can say enough. Thank you to all four of you. I've had a fantastic end to my week because God knows I needed it, both weird, quiet, and disquiet. So with that terrible pun, we're going to call it a day. Thank you very much, everyone. Take lots of
bye,
care.
everybody.
Bye.
Bye.